humor about it, and all this, talking about how, every day I face a full frontal assault of the English language, and, so.
Yeah, it's a pretty rough environment, but I think they've given me the same amount of respect that I give them on a daily basis. I mean, I joke around with them, and I guess that sometimes the differences between these youth and us, for some of us, that is they got caught and we didn't,
Okay.
So, and that's just for some. Now, I can't say that I've done any of the things that some of the ones that I'm serving have done, but you got some that with some pretty serious crimes, and then you got some that some pretty minor things. The judges kind of want to.
Sure.
Make an example out of them.
I'm coming back here, so let me go, and I gotta ask you about that here in just a second. But let's talk a little basketball coming back. DeShawne Blocker is my guest. Somebody I've always wanted to have on, because DeShawne Blocker was probably the greatest women's basketball player, certainly of her era. I was kind of surprised to learn there were two other players in ETSU history that actually surpassed your, at one time, record 2,086 points for the Lady Bucs. But nevertheless, she was the first person, really, I think that first WNIT bid was probably given to ETSU because of your stardom, because you were an All-American candidate and such, and there were only 8 teams that played back then. Of course, you were assistant a long time for Karen Kemp. You were part of the first Lady Bucs team that made the NCAAs. So what is the difference? As a player, you were in the WNIT. As a coach, you prepared for the NCAA tournament. Obviously, one is a little more glamorous. You're playing for the national championship. But tell me a little bit about the differences in the postseason tournaments. For one thing, I would imagine it's a little bit easier for ETSU to win the NIT. But I'm answering your question. What are the differences that you see?
Well, certainly that in a nutshell, with the 8 games, the playing field is, definitely narrow versus the NCAA. You've got 54 teams. Back then with the women's NIT, there, you weren't one and done. Whereas with the NCAA, you've got to win in order to continue to play. But when we played back then, we were able to play consolation game, and possibly get a couple more wins. So that was a big difference in the tournament. Now, I believe with the women's NIT, I'm not sure if they're one and done.
Yes, it is actually, but yeah,
it's still one and done.
Yes, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay, so then, that's the biggest difference, I believe. But of course, everyone would like to be on the bigger stage. But I think that it's great that you even have a smaller stage, not that much smaller, because even some of those teams that are playing in the women's NIT certainly could have very easily been in the bid for the NCAA.
Well, now, when you were coaching at ETSU from 2006 to 2013 and such, as I said, you made the NCAA tournament, if memory serves, in back-to-back seasons out of then the Atlantic Sun Conference. I can actually remember watching one of the games that was played, I believe, in Iowa or so, and broadcast in the middle of and such. Anyway, where I was going with this, is there any different preparation? Is there more of an intensity to preparing for an NCAA tournament than there would be for a WNIT?
I don't think so. I think that, well, for one, you have to explain to your team, the team that you're getting ready to play and, display your talent is, they do the same thing you guys do. They prepare the same way you do. Not to be nervous about the stage that you're being put on. But as far as the preparation, I think you do the same sorts of things when you're going up against a team like you are. The difference is, though, is most of the time in the conference tournament, you know their tendencies with, as a coach during that time, and you've not played in Iowa or a Connecticut or a team of that nature, the preparation is a little bit harder for the coaches. But as far as putting in plays and different sets for the team, you want to prepare them the same way. You don't want to do anything. You don't want any surprises. You don't want to, any surprises to the point where, you're being out-coached.
Now, one thing you mentioned there about, and I think it's a good thing to pick up on, you spoke of in the preparation, forgive me here, my mind just drew a blank in the middle of the interview, DeShawne Blocker. Here we go. This is the deal. The competitiveness in women's college basketball, because we talk about here in the men's game, and they talk a lot about who could make a run, what team could be Cinderella. Could Penn actually knock off Kansas? You've got a couple of cockeyed optimists out there that actually think that is possible and all this. Now, in the women's basketball, it's basically Connecticut and take your best shot. There seems to be more of an elite level of, say, about 5 teams and then everyone else. Again, I remember when you played, and certainly it was that way with, say, Tennessee, and I remember thinking, boy, if DeShawne Blocker, though, got in there and she could have a 40-point game, who knows what could happen, something like that. But do you see now that there is becoming more parity, or what could happen that could increase the parity in women's college basketball?
I actually do. I will have to say, though, Connecticut, Tennessee, Notre Dame, Stanford, South Carolina, those teams are they've got their own. But as far as the other teams in the league, there is a chance, there is that opportunity. And you got to instill in your players' head that, again, they prepare just like we do. If you just stick to the game plan, and hone in as to what the coaches are saying, anything can happen at any moment.
We're talking to DeShawne Blocker, who's talking about anything happening at any moment. Let me ask you this. You've talked about that you followed and watched ETSU in every game this year. Tiana Tarter, how good of a player is she?
Oh, wow. I don't think she realizes how good she can be. There were a couple of opportunities I felt, and this was early on, but I've seen improvement where, I felt like maybe she was taking a few plays off. But, as time progressed, I saw, a lot more of aggressiveness. But I think she could be a lot more aggressive. I think that this first game of the women's NIT, that you'll see a little bit more of that with her. They've got a great freshman that's going to be one to watch in the next few years. Unfortunately, they are losing Courtney, I think her last name.
Mm-hmm.
They're a 3-point specialist, but they're pretty a good team to watch. Definitely was a good team to watch when they played Mercer. A few things happened that Mercer took advantage of, but all in all, I've really enjoyed watching them this season.
Remember, Mercer is a nationally ranked program. I mean, it would, and that's, I think, one of the things that I talk about, maybe about a lack of parity in women's basketball is that, I remember reading the preview and saying, oh, ETSU played them well. They were only losing by 9 points in the third quarter in one of the games. Well, that's not so good. I mean, but that's one of the things.
Mercer knocked off UNC.
No, I get that. And they play Georgia in the NCAA tournament. We're talking actually to Brittany Azell, who'll be a guest if all works well tomorrow, actually. And she actually gives them a decent chance of beating Georgia in that game in the NCAA tournament. But we're talking WNIT, and tonight at 7:05, it is ETSU at James Madison. Now, we mentioned Tiana Tarter. She's averaging 18 points a game. And the leading scorer for the Dukes is Camellia Smalls, who is averaging 15 points a game. She's a guard as well. You also mentioned the freshman of the year, Erica Haynes-Overton, who is averaging 14 points a year, very quick, 4 steals a game. Question is, you're both freshman conference players of the year. So Erica Haynes-Overton, do you see any DeShawne Blocker in her?
Well, she needs to get a little bit taller.
Okay.
But, the one thing I know, I feel like that we have in common is our ability to not give up on plays. Very fast. I think I can still take her, though. I mean, as a post player, I was keeping up with the guard. So, she's got very quick hands. I can recall as a freshman getting in a lot of foul trouble. But that just came with, our youthfulness and not understanding this game is a little bit tighter than it would be in a high school game. But yes, I can say that, she never gives up on plays. Really I never really saw her take any plays off. And just always, had the hustle game and very aggressive. If she can stick with that and stick with the game plan, I think she's going to do very, very well for ETSU.
Well, remember, I am asking you to compare a guard there to yourself who was more of a post player. And like I say, started at the beginning of the interview, the rebounding totals that you put up in your career were extraordinary. And still very much standing in the record books. DeShawne Blocker, great player at ETSU, assistant coach for 7 years. When Brittany Ezell took over, was there any talk that you had with her about continuing on as an assistant at ETSU?
Actually, we did not. One of the things I recall, the other assistant coaches did throw their name in the hat to assist her with ETSU. I did not at that time. My daughter was in 8th grade,
mm-hmm.
and travel was getting ready to enter into 9th grade, and travel would have been quite a bit for her as a senior. As a freshman in high school. It would have been unfair for her to have to be on the road if Ezell would have chosen me to be one of her assistant coaches. So I did not choose to go into that direction of coaching while my daughter, was focusing on her, high school years. So no, we did not have a discussion. She just said that she was surprised that
mm-hmm.
I did not apply for the position. And, we just kind of left it at that.
You mentioned off the air here that you were an adult education instructor, off the radio, I should say, an adult education instructor in Augusta, Georgia, which is where you're living right now. Do you have any desire to get back into coaching on a college level now that your daughter is, grown, now that she's an adult?
Yeah, she's done. I thought about it. I find myself now critiquing as I would if I was coaching. Looking at the set that each of the teams are running, and just kind of find myself saying what I would do differently as I watch different teams on the couch. So to answer your question, at some point, yeah, I think I'd like to get back into coaching. I know, I definitely still have a passion for it that I don't think I'll ever lose. And, I just really enjoy the game.
No, we're talking to DeShawne Blocker, and again, some may have heard when we were talking about the adult education instructor. I know we were talking, and you said, I'm dealing with a lot of juveniles now, and something that surprised me, because I remember, when you were at school, when we were both students there and having some classes together, the very nice young lady. We talk about how much you liked Frank Santori when he was calling the Lady Bucs games and things of this nature. And we had go into discussions about interviewing styles, all this sort of stuff. But one of the things I wanted to ask you is that you were talking about, some of these people that are juveniles now in the wrong place at the wrong time. My goodness, this could have been me in all this. I'm stunned. What kind of trouble did DeShawne Blocker get into?
That's what I'm saying. I can't say that the things that they've done, I can't say that I've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
I can say that my brothers may have been involved in certain situations. A lot of situations, it does touch home, not necessarily in my particular being, but I grew up with boys, and so it that surprised me that some of them. And I said, what I said to you off the air, the difference is they got caught, but we didn't, And so, and some of the things that they did, these youth have done, that they deserve to be behind bars. And then there are others that, the judge made the judgment to slap them on the wrist, say, hey, you need to spend at least 6 months. And so, no, I was scared to even be late for practice. That's just how disciplined I was. I didn't miss curfew. I just, did everything that I was asked to do, which sometimes haunt me today. Because if I'm running late for work, it really just bothers me that I'm late for work.
They get on me here when I'm that too. So that's you'll find that kind of universally. People don't like that. But DeShawne Blocker, I will ask you, as the adult education instructor and working with juveniles. Now, this does sound like it's kind of similar to coaching. Sometimes you'll take a player from say a non-white picket fence background and try to get them on the right path and such. But what are you doing these days down there in Augusta with the juveniles of Augusta, Georgia?
Well, the ones that are in my class, they have basically dropped out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're doing is trying to get their GED. And my job is to help them with test-taking skills. And some of it is, or a lot of it is, I'm having to teach the subjects all over again to these youth. Some of them who dropped out, they may have dropped out of high school. They may have even dropped out. I had one who actually just finished. And the last grade he actually completed in school was 5th grade. And so that's quite a task to have to teach someone math, which is a very hard subject for a lot of youth. The Pythagorean theorem, or how to do a slope, quadratic formula, the area of a triangle. So it's elementary for me, but very difficult for them. And I'm, just trying to get them up to speed so that they can, take that test and pass.
A lot of times, too, you've had a while to, not only the college education from ETSU, but a while to learn the Pythagorean theory. I'm glad you're teaching that and not me. That's all I'm saying. I'm still trying to fit it and all that. So she can tell you how to box out. And the Pythagorean theory, that is one universal woman, and that's DeShawne Blocker. Hey, I got to ask you, what is your prediction for tonight's game for the Lady Bucs at James Madison?
I am all for Lady Bucs basketball. I predict that the Lady Bucs will win against James Madison by more than 1 point.
There you go. Do they have a line on it?
There it is.
Does the NIT say more? So at least a bucket she's got right there. So if
that's all it takes to win by 1 point.
Are you now not? You're not going to give the one now. You said at least one or by more than one.
More than one.
More than one. So in other words, down by 2, 10 seconds left. You're going to say get the 2 so you can win this thing in overtime. I say. Okay, but I'll say this. They do have the leading scorer in the matchup in Tarter, who has, although perhaps not as media-friendly as some people would like, has certainly become one of the great players in ETSU basketball history. Now, you played professionally overseas. Do you think Tarter can play on a higher level?
I think she has all the abilities to play in a higher level. I've played against some pretty tough European players. Maybe not as quick as she, but it's all about decision making. It's all about playing within a system, and it's all about knowing how to take over games and executing. And I think she has the ability to do that.
DeShawne Blocker, a lot of people say the best player ever to play at ETSU for the women. And she was the first person to take them to a postseason tournament. It was the WNIT, a different kind of WNIT back then, but it was the WNIT, and it was basically based on your star power as really at the time one of the 5 best players in women's college basketball. I mean, that's why ETSU got the bid back then some 23 odd years ago. So anyway, thanks so much. And I'd love to talk to you a little bit more, especially when you want to critique women's basketball on the show. How's that, DeShawne?
Oh, that sounds excellent. I can get real used to this. So anytime you want to call me up and, we talk basketball, I'd love to do it.
She's DeShawne Blocker, Tri-City Sports Now. They have a big rule change in minor league baseball, and I'm going to tell you all about it when we come back. And I don't like the rule change in minor league.